When was the last time you thought about giving up? In silence, not in a scream, but in that long pause between one thought and another, when the soul goes quiet and the chest whispers, I can't take it anymore, when the body keeps going, but inside, surrender has already happened, when the path that once held promise now feels like punishment. There comes a moment when even the strong grow weary, when the exhaustion isn't physical, but existential, an emptiness with no name. Just wait, and you look around, and everything remains the same, but inside you, something is crumbling. Why keep going when everything in me wants to stop? But what if this feeling of abandonment is a disguised invitation? What if the silence you interpret as absence is the deepest form of teaching? Not all pain is punishment. Not all emptiness is loss. Not every desert is a curse. Sometimes the desert is the master, the setting that strips away all that is superfluous and reveals who you truly are. It's there when everything in you wants to quit, that the rarest virtue is born, silent, endurance. The same that sustained prophets, the same that shaped kings and sages, the same that echoes even today, in hearts that refused to give up. Today, we'll uncover the Stoic message behind when everything in you wants to quit. Resist the crossing of the desert. Stay until the end, because this story may show you that what seems like abandonment is actually a calling, a call to cross through. To mature. To be reborn. And if this silent journey resonates with you, subscribe. Here, every video is a compass, a reminder that even when the world falls silent, the soul can keep marching. The people of Israel had left Egypt. The chains that once bound their wrists now lay broken on the ground, defeated. But not every captivity ends with shattered shackles. There was something deeper, denser, still holding them prisoner, because though their feet were free, Egypt still lived inside them in their thoughts, their fears, their distorted memories of security amid pain. They had been freed from visible slavery, but they carried within them the most resilient slavery of all, that of the mind. Moses walked ahead, the chosen one, the man who heard the voice in the fire, the one who defied pharaohs with firm words and hands trembling inside. But even here at questions he dared not speak aloud, because to lead doesn't mean having all the answers. Sometimes it just means walking in faith before a people who expect certainty. When all you have is silence, the desert enveloped them in its indifferent vastness. The sand seemed to shift like doubt piling up in their eyes, one moment, seeping into their thoughts, the next. The sky, so wide and blue, was no comfort. It was a mirror of emptiness, a reminder of how small man is before eternity. The heat didn't just burn their skin, it dried up hope. The thirst was physical, yes, but there was another thirst deeper, rising from the soul, begging for meaning. 40 years, not days, not weeks. 40 years of repeated steps, paths that seemed circular, as if time had stopped, as if the promise was always just out of reach. Between the yesterday of slavery and the tomorrow of the promised land, there was the today of the desert, and it was this today that became unbearable. Over time, the faith that had once been vibrant, sung with joy at the crossing of the Red Sea, began to turn into murmurs. The same questions arose. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? It would have been better to die there than to wander here. We're alone, abandoned. Even those who had seen the sea part now doubted. It's easy to have faith in the face of miracles, harder to keep that faith in the face of silence. When nothing happens, when days pile up without answers, without change, without relief, the heart grows weary. Moses, the one who carried the burden of an entire people, felt this weariness. He felt fragile, and he climbed the mountain, alone, not to escape the people but to avoid screaming in front of them, because some pains can only be digested in the silence of solitude. Up there, he didn't ask for ease, he didn't beg for shortcuts, he only sought understanding, he only pleaded for meaning. And what did he find? Silence, no voice, no sign, no explanation, just the wind, just the sky, just himself. But in that silence, something happened. Not with the people, not with the landscape, not with the situation. The only thing that changed was him. Moses descended the mountain not with answers, but with resolve. He came down not with a detailed plan, but with a rock inside him. The desert was the same, the doubts the same, but there was a subtle, powerful difference. Now, he was at peace with uncertainty. He had accepted that not every path reveals the destination ahead of time. that some promises are built precisely in the days without direction. And so, the years passed, deaths came, entire generations fell in the desert. Time showed no mercy. The promise seemed farther away than ever, but they kept going, not by strength, but by conviction. Every step taken was an act of resistance. Every morning faced was a small victory against despair. Every night, without an answer, was another chance to practice faith without noise. The people learned to live without haste, to wait without complaint, to walk even when they couldn't see. And this didn't happen overnight. It was a process, a silent maturing. The desert that once seemed like punishment revealed itself as the teacher, and slowly, Egypt began to fade from within them, not because they forgot the past, but because they built something new inside themselves, resilience. Don't until one day, the desert was behind them, not because it ended, but because they were ready. It wasn't the end of the journey that freed them. It was what the journey built. In them, it wasn't about the promised land, it was about who they had become along the way. The real miracle wasn't the arrival, it was the transformation, because the desert doesn't teach with words, it teaches with silence. And in that silence, the soul learns what no speech can teach, that there is virtue in continuing even without guarantees, that there is strength in enduring even without applause, that there is wisdom in not fleeing the hard path. Moses didn't see the promise fulfilled with his own eyes, but he fulfilled his role with dignity. He planted a courage that crossed generations, and he departed not as a glorified hero, but as a man who endured without noise, without spectacle. He simply endured, and that, perhaps, is the most Stoic lesson of all. Difficulty reveals the man. Epictetus. Moses wasn't tested by physical strength. He wasn't proven in sword battles or direct combat. His real test was invisible. It was the weight of leading a people who didn't always believe, who didn't always follow, who often turned against him. It was the silent anguish of walking in faith. Even when the path seemed like an endless circle, it was also doubt, not just others, but his own. Because no leader, no matter how strong, avoids questioning whether they're on the right path when everything around them crumbles. Moses, like any man of flesh and blood, likely felt fear, exhaustion, loneliness, and yet, he kept going. That is the real battlefield, not the physical terrain, but the mental one. You have power over your mind, not external events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius, the desert, with all its relentless vastness, was uncontrollable. The heat, the thirst, the people's reactions, the uncertainties of tomorrow, all of it lay beyond human control. But Moses found an anchor in the midst of that chaos, and that anchor wasn't outside, it was within. His mind became a temple, his spirit a refuge. When nothing else could be controlled, he chose to control himself. This is one of the greatest virtues of Stoic philosophy, inner sovereignty. That ability not to react to the world with despair, but with presence, not to bend to circumstances, but to use them as part of the forging of character. Like iron in the furnace, the soul is shaped not in calm, but in the heat of adversity. The constancy of the soul is a higher virtue than momentary bravery. This is what Seneca would call constancy of the soul, a steadfastness that doesn't announce itself, a faith that doesn't shout, a strength that needs to prove nothing to anyone. Moses didn't seek approval. He didn't make speeches for vanity's sake. His leadership was solitary, difficult, at times thankless, and yet he remained. That silent constancy is perhaps the noblest of all virtues, because it doesn't feed on immediate rewards. It lives on integrity. The endurance he demonstrated wasn't arrogance, it wasn't blind pride, it was maturity. The maturity to know that what happens outside the drought, the delay, the criticism doesn't have to shake what exists inside. That external turmoil has no authority over the soul's core. Don't be overcome by the appearance of things. The tragedy isn't what happens, but how you react to it. Epictetus Moses lived in the eye of the storm for decades, but with every ascent to the mountain, with every encounter with God's silence, he returned firmer, not because the problems had disappeared, but because he had grown stronger within. He learned to see chaos as part of the journey, and himself as the guardian of his own spirit. In the Stoic tradition, virtue isn't just a choice, it's a daily practice. The constant training of not depending on the external to stand firm, the effort to be the rock, even when everything around you is quicksand. This is the virtue of endurance, not of pride, but of maturity, the endurance that doesn't seek applause, the steadiness that doesn't need to win to be victorious, the wisdom to understand that suffering isn't failure and that continuing, even exhausted, is the real triumph. What Moses lived in the desert was, above all, a living example of Stoicism in action, a testament that it's possible to endure long, harsh, unending trials without letting the soul be destroyed. He didn't conquer the desert, he crossed it, and in crossing it, he conquered himself. That is the eternal lesson. Pain may be inevitable, the wait may be long, but how you choose to walk, that is your most sacred freedom. And you, how many times have you found yourself in the middle of your own desert? Not a desert of sand, but of certainties, of answers that never come, of strength, abandoning you when you need it most. Deserts where prayers seem to hit the ceiling, where words fall silent, and all that's left is a void too hard to name. Maybe you're in that desert right now, waiting for a sign, for a gesture of confirmation, for someone to say, it will pass, you're on the right path, you'll come out of this stronger. But what if this silence you feel isn't punishment? What if it's actually preparation? The mute call to a kind of maturity that isn't taught in books, but born in scarcity. In the crossing, ask yourself, honestly, are you living in your own invisible prison, chained to unrealistic expectations, to guilt that's no longer yours, to a past you keep repeating, even unwillingly? Who betrayed you, and you still haven't forgiven? Not with words, but by emptying the resentment. Who have you been trying to carry in your baggage, when you should have left them on the path long ago? Many of our deserts aren't outside, they're within, made of resentment, attachment, fear, of undigested silence, and sometimes it's precisely these inner spaces of pain that hide the beginning of our deepest transformation, because the desert is never just deprivation, it's revelation. Could this season where nothing moves be the very place where your soul is being sculpted? In times of waiting, life asks us, do you trust who you're becoming? Even without answers, even without visibility, even when no one applauds, no one notices. Stoic philosophy invites us to a simple but powerful question. Is this within my control? If the answer is yes, then action is the path. Stand up. Act with courage. Take responsibility for what's within your reach. But if the answer is no, then the virtue is acceptance, letting go, stopping the fight against what's beyond your control. That is the art of living wisely, acting where we can, and finding peace where we can't. What doesn't depend on me cannot destroy me. That is the essence of Stoicism, and also the essence of every crossing. There will be days when everything in you wants to stop, but maybe that desire to quit is just the surface, and deep down what you're asking for isn't the end, but a new way to continue. Without carrying unnecessary weights, without needing everyone's approval, without waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. Because real growth rarely happens in calm waters. It's born when you choose to keep going, even when tired. Even when alone, even in silence. Remember, the people of Israel walked for 40 years, where many died along the way. But those who remained were transformed. And you? Are you willing to cross your desert, not to arrive faster, but to emerge changed? The crossing is not punishment, it is revelation, not the absence of God. Life, or meaning it, is the silence of the forge, the place where everything fragile in us is burned away until only essence remains. The desert is not meant to please it, is meant to refine. To test what in you is true, and dissolve what is still vanity, fear, or the need for control. You may try to escape, seek shortcuts, pretend faith, rush time, but the deserted, impassive teacher bows to no haste. It only ends when the apprentice stops running and begins to listen. To listen to themselves, to listen to life, to listen to what is revealed in lack, in delay, in solitude, and when everything in you wants to quit, when even breathing feels like effort. Remember, Moses was not spared. Marcus Aurelius was not spared. No man of integrity was spared the crossing, but all who faced it with presence emerged unrecognizably in the best way. They walked in silence. They knew thirst. They knew fear. They carried doubts they could share with no one. Yet they kept going, one step, then another, and then one more. It was not the promised land that defined them, it was the character born on the journey, the steadfastness that held firm even without guarantees, the ability to walk even without seeing. This is the wisdom not always taught, but which the soul recognizes when it hears. Maturity is not having all the answers, it is continuing, even when they don't come, and you. If this story has stirred something in you, if this silence feels familiar, if this arid road reminds you of where you stand now, then know this: you are not alone, and you are not lost. You are being forged, refined, in what truly matters. Like gold, in fire, like roots growing unseen beneath the earth and seen, but alive. In the end, it is not the desert that changes, it is us. And perhaps that is exactly what was always needed, not to change the world around you, but to be transformed within so deeply that no future circumstance can break you. If this story has touched something deep in you, consider following this channel. Here, every narrative is more than words. It is a mirror for the soul, a silent compass for those who walk, even without a map. Because sometimes, what you need, most is not an answer, but someone to tell you with truth, keep going.